Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, we are back from spring break and we're hitting it hard. And we are coming back with the core of what this show is all about, the independent movement. And I can think of no better guest to bring back on the program to give us a sense of this evolving, growing, chaotic, exciting landscape as we go into spring. There are many things blooming, but I think the independent movement may be one of the most exciting of all. Rejoining us finally on the show is the great and powerful John Opdycke. Welcome back to Independent Americans, my friend.
Great and powerful. Wow. That's a lot to live up to, Paul. It's great. It's great to see you again.
Well, greater and more powerful because we spoke a year ago.
I'll try not to disappoint.
Yeah, it was May of last year that you came on the show. You and I talk a lot. We work together on stuff a lot, but we haven't talked on my show in almost a year. And I really wanted to do, a check-in on the landscape because it's an exciting time for independence and an exciting time to be around it. But it's also a conversation I think you and I can take up a couple notches. And that's what I'm hoping we can do today, like we always do.
Yeah. And I think, I know we want to talk about the new Gallup poll. And I think that in some ways, what I'm really urging in all the conversations I'm having is that don't let numerical growth let you get cocky, because the amount of pushback, the amount of coercion that's going on politically that's targeting independence is very significant, and we cannot underestimate it.
I am so glad you brought that up. I want to get to that. Let me take it back to where we always start. You've been in the fight. You're always in the fight. Where are you and how are you?
I'm good. I just moved to Chicago and been here for 2 weeks and getting our house set up, my partner Kathy and I, and moving is a piece of work, but it's all going well. And we're in a beautiful neighborhood in Chicago, right by the lake. So I'm very happy about that. And I'm doing well. I had knee surgery a couple months ago, and the rehab's been slow, but going well. And overall, healthy, happy, and just really excited to be leading open primaries, which is really accelerating around the country.
Your dedication is constant. And I think the night before you got knee surgery, we were at an event for Final Five NYC with Sal Albanese and Andrew Yang and some others. Then you went under the knife the next day. You didn't really miss a beat. You've been back at it. I'm glad you're in Chicago, because Chicago in like May and June, I think, is one of the best places in America, right? Let's start with that Gallup poll. And I don't think it's gotten a lot of coverage outside of a couple places, but the new poll says 49% of Americans are now considering themselves independent, 49% of Americans who were polled. And I want you to help us understand why polling may have strengths and weaknesses, but that's up from 44% last month, 40 in January, as low as 35 in last October. So it kind of bounces around. But I think the significant number is that 49% of Americans in this poll who were polled called themselves independent, which is basically larger than the amount who call themselves Democrats or Republicans, or it's close, right? So tell me what you take away from this new poll, and maybe what we can take away from what's not being polled, what's missing from these snapshots that Gallup and others are looking at.
Sure. Well, two things. One, the pollsters are remarkably uncurious about why people are independents. They just don't ask them. They just say Democrat, Republican, independent. If you say independent, they just move on and ask you a whole series of questions. I think it would be, and frankly, I'm waiting for the smart, intelligent pollsters to say, you know what, this thing has been trending upwards for decades. Let's dig in. Let's deep dive. Let's really find out what's driving the rise of independence. They're not doing that yet. But what's happening is that so that Gallup poll came out 48 hours ago, 72 hours ago. Within 24 hours, there was a 1,500 word deep dive analysis in the Washington Post by Philip Bump, in which he says, I found this so astounding that number is a complete lie and fabrication. In fact, there are less independents today than there were in 1950. When 20% of Americans said, I'm an independent, Now 49% say they're independent. By his logic, that means there are fewer independents. And here's how he gets there. And it's a piece of sleight of hand that I actually have deep respect for because it's so diabolical. What he does is say, okay, so there's all these people that call themselves independents, but they're not all that independent. Most of them are attached lightly to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And the number of true independents is actually only about 5, 7, 8% of the population, which is lower than it was in 1950. So they basically, these pundits, they feel completely comfortable saying to someone, a voter who gets a poll at home and says, are you a Democrat, Republican, or independent? And they say, I'm an independent. They completely say, oh, you're not an actual independent unless you can prove that you only vote for third-party candidates. If you don't vote for third-party candidates every election, you're not a true independent. Therefore, you're a Democrat light or a Republican light. It is to reduce being an independent to who you vote for in November is a fallacy of monumental proportions. Being an independent is much more than just who you vote for on election day. It's a cultural statement. It's a political statement. It's an attitudinal statement. And yet they will not investigate it. They will not legitimize it. And that's a big problem for the independent movement because we are still related to as if we do not exist.
Now, I want to dig deeper into how that's panning out because I also see a lack of identifiable leadership in the independent movement, right? So in the past, we've talked about this before, about how independents are often identified by whoever was the most high-profile person to last call themselves an independent. But I saw Andrew Yang on with Chris Cuomo, and they like to use this ice cream analogy where they say, well, it's like vanilla and chocolate and people want strawberry. And like, I heard that and I was like, no, it's like rum raisin and pistachio. And it's the only option in the store for a bunch of people who are lactose intolerant, who like yogurt, who want sorbet, who want ice pops. Like the country wants a lot more than they have the options for. And I think these polls have reduced it to when you are presented with two shitty options, which one would you choose? Rather than digging deeper into who they really are. And I'm glad you're bringing out that point about how it's attitudinal, because I continue to say they're not just looking for a third party. They're looking for other options, right? And they don't want to, I don't think, find an alternative to the two parties that is necessarily another party. They want to be independent. Many of them don't want to join any party and want to be able to have an a la carte series of options in who they vote for. And I think you've been great about identifying places where we see that happening. So can you shift to the landscape, and whether it's Maine or Alaska, where do you see a place or places that show us maybe better than this poll who independents really are?
Well, let me just dig a little deeper into the analogies you gave, because I think this will help the viewers and listeners kind of process this a little better. In some ways, Andrew Yang and Chris Cuomo gave an example of ice cream in terms of choices. And you gave, I think, a more nuanced example, but they're both similar in that you're basically talking about independents as consumers who want more choices. But see, I actually think if you're going to have any understanding of independence, there is this thing going on in America where people are saying, where independents are saying, I can't just be a consumer. I can't just, which am I going to pick? I have to find a way to get involved in creating some new ways of doing politics in this country. Because the way we're doing it now is literally killing our country. And that's making that shift from being a consumer of prepackaged choices, even if they're good choices, to being a creator of new forms of political life is an incredibly difficult transition. There is so much that goes up against that capacity. There is so much energy spent by the Democrats and Republicans to telling us, the American people, the people that made a revolution 250 years ago, the people that drove the creation of the first citizen-led democracy in modern era. You don't need to create anything. We got this.
Right.
We got this. Your job is just to show up and pick strawberry or vanilla. And I think that we have to go beyond simply saying, well, look, strawberry and vanilla is not enough. We need some other choices. We need to say, no, 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 no. It's not that we need other choices. We need to mobilize the American people to create other forms of political life that are not controlled, that are not prepackaged for us. And that's so hard. I mean, it is so difficult.
But we are seeing some progress there, right? And I think that's where open primaries and your work, I've called you before kind of the godfather of the independent movement or the reform movement. I think you're one of the smartest, most tireless people. You've got integrity. People know you're a real independent, and you know this shit better than anybody. You're not somebody who just joined this because it's hot or interesting. But can you talk about the landscape as you see it? I look at it almost like a battlefield. We've had folks like Admiral Stavridis to talk about the global landscape. I've had people come on and talk about the economic landscape. But when you look at the independent map, right, when you see Pennsylvania, Tennessee, South, you're in all these fights and you're kind of in a war room in open primaries. Sometimes you're on the offense, sometimes you're on the defense. Where are a couple of places that you've seen significant wins or losses or fights?
Well, there's a huge amount of activity. I think of it as guerrilla activity. We're sniping at the British from the forest. We're not facing them in battle. We're not winning big battles. We're kind of positioning ourselves, and there's a growing movement that is, and it rears its head in interesting ways, like Kansas, where the Republican legislature said, oh, Roe v. Wade overturned. We're going to put this anti-abortion referendum on the ballot. We're going to win it because this is a Republican state. And the voters surprised everybody, including the Democrats. They basically found a way to say, we're not going along with your political script. Now, that's just a tiny little thing. Did it create much power? Not much, because everyone is still constrained in this two-party system. But I experience it in, and you're not going to like this, I actually think Obama and Trump, in a weird way, together, and most people wouldn't put Obama and Trump together, they gave some expression to this desire for something other than cookie cutter, other than purely partisan warriors, people that were finding way. Now, I could talk for 7 hours about how I think Trump opportunized off that and did his own thing, which was nihilistic and ridiculous. I think there's ways to talk about Obama in which he ran as an independent and governed as a Democrat and made all kinds of mistakes. But that doesn't negate the millions of Americans who voted for them to break out of some kind of mold, some kind of script. Is it translating into a new major third party? No. I think you and I see this differently about Andrew Yang and the Forward Party. I feel very good about that. I feel very good about Andrew leaving the Democratic Party, telling his war stories about how corrupt the Democratic Party is, and going out there and recruiting tens of thousands of people all over the country. They have a huge amount of growing to do, and they have to figure out tactical ways to build that. But I think it's a good first step. I also think, the interest in open primaries has gone from virtually nothing 10 years ago to I'm now working in 20 states. I'm working with Democrats, Republicans, independents. We're working on ballot measures in South Dakota, in Nebraska, in Oklahoma. We're building a citizen campaign in Florida. There's a legislative effort in Pennsylvania and Rhode Island. And these things have real leaders, real grassroots support. The polling shows like 80% of Americans want a fair, level playing field. This is interesting. We did some focus groups in Pennsylvania. We did 3 separate focus groups of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Just talking to them about open primaries. What do they think are the positives? What are the negatives? In all 3, and they were independent, they weren't connected. A person in each of these focus groups said, why can't we vote in the primaries the way we vote in the general election? We just vote for whoever we want. Why is that so complicated? And in some ways, to me, that's an expression of this emerging independent sensibility of people saying, why is the crap that the Democrats and Republicans tell us is the truth, reality, the way things are done? Why do we do it that way? Why can't we do it a different way? Did Moses say this is how we have to do things? And I think that kind of basic, pragmatic, American, let's find a better way is popping up all over the country in ways I find, frankly, I think the American people are actually slightly ahead of the independent movement, of the third party movement, of the reform movement. And we have to catch up with them, not the other way around.
Yep. I think that's right. And I think we share a lot of views and we disagree on some of the tactical stuff. But I think overall, I think there's this incredible historic moment. And with regard to Forward and Yang, I'm rooting for them because I'm rooting for alternatives. They're just not my option, right? And I think for many people, especially that are more national security focused, like that come from the first responders community, I don't think it's a message that resonates. It just feels too liberal, frankly, right? And when it's run by Yang, I think they're I'm rooting for them, but they're not strawberry to vanilla and chocolate. They're like froyo, like there's something totally different. And I think there are these other options that may come, and I think they're going to be strongest if they're led by a leader that people trust. Right? They trust to be independent or a leader with resources. We've seen everybody from, Mike Bloomberg to Jesse Ventura. And I feel like the movement may be suffering from a candidate problem right now. And I want to know, as you look across this country, we also see organizations that I think are giving the independent movement a bad name. Now is the time of year, the time of election cycle where no label says we might run a bipartisan ticket and people freak out, right? And because they don't say who it's going to be. And we don't know if it's going to be Kirsten Sinema and Manchin or Bill Weld or any other variation, but it's this like straw man argument about what a third party option could do. And most of the polling says it would help Trump. But in the midst of all that, there seem to be leaders on the sidelines, or there seem to be leaders rising up. Last time we talked, we were watching Evan McMullin. Are there any independent leaders to watch? You were at the convention, in Texas, where I said I wasn't going to go because Tulsi Gabbard is there. She's trying to grab this independent mantra. Manchin's trying to do it now. Sinema's trying to do it right now. Who do you think are the top 2 or 3 people that are really going to resonate with the people that you feel are independent?
Well, this is a tricky question, and this goes back to my warning about being cocky, because I think that all of us are vulnerable to thinking, hey, we're 49% of the country. We're the biggest group of voters in the country. We should be attracting people like Colin Powell and Mark Cuban and these big shots with money and prestige from the middle. We should be, and you know what? We're not. Right. We're not. I'll tell you why. And this is not a knock against those people at all. If you go independent, and I'm talking someone like that, someone who's got a lot of things to lose, money, access, so forth and so on, you become a second-class citizen. You become marginalized. You get ridiculed. You get attacked. And we can't think that because we're 49% of the country, that we have any power. We got no power. Why would a big shot go to a movement and say, I'm going to lead this movement of people with no power, and it's going to cost me money, my reputation, I'm going to be ridiculed, I'm no longer invited to the cocktail parties, I mean, these people are big shots. And here, so in some ways, what I say, Paul, is that we should use that as a barometer for how our movement is doing. And it's why I will not criticize Andrew Yang, because he has risked it. And whether or not he turns out to be the transformational leader, I don't care.
Right.
People take a risk and say, I'm giving up the cocktail party invites. I'm going to be ridiculed by this and that. I'm like, go for it. I love it. But we, in some ways, we have to do the harder work of building local committees, infrastructure, networks, book clubs, independent political learning centers. I don't know, you name it. We've got to build hundreds of these things all over the country, in red, blue, rural, conservative, liberal. We have to build an independent movement. And I think if we can start gaining some more power, then the big shots are going to come. It'll be like a tsunami. we will be fighting them off because they will say, "Oh, I can now be an independent, and I can lead a movement that's real."
Yeah. I think at some levels it's a chicken and egg scenario, and nobody wants to be first. I mean, I don't know if it was you or someone else I spoke to, and I said, like, who wants to be the first European soccer star to come over for MLS, right? Like Pele did it a couple decades ago, and then Beckham did it, right? But we can't get Messi, right? We can't get Ronaldo, right? And is there a first person, right, who maybe, because it's an opportunity, maybe they see a state where you've got a right-wing person versus a left-wing person, and there's an opportunity for someone to split the difference in a ranked choice voting state where they can actually win and break that and become the new leader of the movement. But I do go back to it because there is no power, but there is opportunity. And that's where Cinema and Manchin and others are playing with it constantly and playing with the power of that name of independence. But like right now, who have we got? We've got Yang, we've got media figures like Smirkanich and Joe Walsh, and leaders in the movement like you and others that are less well known. But right now, there aren't too many well-known independents, especially for the younger generation, right? Where we see a lot of folks declaring their independence. They don't want to join the parties. I don't see any 35-year-old rock star mayors or 35-year-old rock star governors that are saying, I'm going to be the face of the new independent movement, unless you see them.
No, I don't. And let me just go back to your soccer analogy. Yeah. So look at, when I played soccer my whole life.
Yeah.
When I was a kid in the 70s, all my coaches were people that had never played soccer. They didn't know anything about soccer. Nothing. So what's transformed? My nephews now, they play soccer on teams. One of my nephews just spent a week in Barcelona in an international tournament. He's on a Barcelona team coached by people from Barcelona in Chicago. Yeah. There has been, over the last 30 years, a transformation of the grassroots expression of soccer in this country. And not just boys, girls. I mean, in some ways, the girls leapfrogged over the boys and built that. And now, we're starting to attract a level, and it's transformed. The way we're going to get the Ronaldos and the Messis is to keep building the youth soccer, not by focusing on Ronaldo and Messi. And I think it's the same thing for the independent movement. We have to build organization at the local level, and it's hard work. It's messy. It's unsexy. It doesn't get any media. It doesn't get anything. But the more we can build that, I'm telling you, Paul, we don't have to worry about the big shots. They'll come when they come.
I think, and I know you and I talk about this a lot. You and I talk about this a lot. There's also another way, which is a billionaire builds a stadium and gives Messi the money, right? And Messi comes, right? And that's where, whether it's a Mike Bloomberg or, Elon Musk or whoever else, the other side of what you and I know is there's not much money in this space. So if you declare you're an independent, you're not going to get PAC money. You're not going to get grassroots money. You're not going to get, media money like you would in some other areas. But I do think we're at this moment where and you and I have talked about this a lot, off the record. Like, I think there's an opportunity, especially for celebrities, for people from sports, for veterans and retired generals and folks like that. If a couple of them can get together, I think we could see a new level of interest and motivation behind those independents. But let me ask you to take it to another side of this, which is kind of maybe the more diabolical side, it's assumed right now that Trump's going to be, by many, the nominee for the GOP, or he's at least leading in most areas, right? It looks like DeSantis is losing ground, but he may not be the GOP candidate. What do you think about if Trump decides to run as an independent, which it looks like he probably would do? He would just say, you know what, I'm running anyway. What would that mean, and would it set us back? Or if someone like Kirsten Sinema runs as a presidential candidate, would that set us back as a movement?
Well, not to get too philosophical here, Paul, so you can shut me up at any point, but I think that's why, see, Trump could say, I'm now an independent. I'm running as an independent. Anybody can do that. Anybody can run as an independent. That's not the same thing as building the independent movement.
Sure.
They both have the word independent in them, but there's no connection between those things automatically. Now, is there a scenario in which Donald Trump runs as an independent that could be beneficial to the creation of an independent movement? Yes, if Donald Trump wasn't Donald Trump.
Right.
Like, he was a different human being. He's incapable, in my estimation, in some ways, maybe I'm wrong, he's incapable of doing anything other than representing himself. But could he get struck by lightning and change his personality completely and say, you know what, I've been too divisive and I want to run as an independent because I think we need outsiders like me and all the outsiders, liberal and conservative, to come together? Could he do that? Sure, if he got struck by lightning, or but I think that's an important question, because Jesse Ventura, I worked on his campaign back in 1994. I helped get him elected. I raised money for him. I was a fan. The worst thing that ever happened to the independent movement in Minnesota was that he got elected. The reason was not because he was a bad candidate. He was a phenomenal candidate, and Bill Hillsman ran a great campaign. And the people of Minnesota said, this Democrat stuffed shirt and this Republican stuffed shirt, screw him, we'll take the wrestler.
Right.
But then Jesse Ventura thought that he was in office in order to govern the state of Minnesota, not to continue to build a new political movement. He stopped building.
Right.
Whereas if he had coming in second place, that would have been the best thing that could have happened to him.
Interesting. Yeah.
So there is this very, challenging. I honestly think the last independent candidate that was fused with an independent movement was Ross Perot.
Right.
And that was everything to do with how he ran. Him getting on Larry King and saying, if you put me on the ballot, I'll run. If you, the American people, want it, I will do it. Other candidates tend to be, they don't trust the American people. They're like, here's what I'm doing. It's about me.
Right.
Perot said, this ain't about me. This is about you. If you want a different voice up there that's challenging the hypocrisy of these two parties, do it. And people said, we'll do it. And they did.
I'm going to ask you to stick around for a couple of extra questions for our Patreon members. My thanks to them for supporting this work, and to many of you who've supported open primaries and you've been engaging in this conversation. I will never shut you up, John. I love having these discussions. I think the country needs to hear from you more often. I hope maybe we can do these quarterly, where you check in and give us a sense of what's happening in the landscape. Is there a place that folks can look to, let's say, between now and the end of the summer? A hotspot where you would say, hey, folks, watch this place, or a place where open primaries is working on something that will be pivotal between now and, let's say, the end of the summer?
Yeah, I would say two places, Pennsylvania and Florida. Pennsylvania, we are getting all our ducks in a row to pass a bill to allow the million independents to vote in primaries. We just did, our local team there just did a great piece of research, which is still in draft phase, but I've read the draft of it. They did the work that these pollsters should be doing. They said, who are the independents in Pennsylvania? Who are they? And they, it's a 40-page report on who they are. The other thing in Florida, we're launching a campaign. It should be up and running by mid-May, called Florida Open Primaries, to challenge the write-in loophole, which basically Florida has open primaries, but it's only in races in which all the candidates are from one party, which you'd think would be a rarity. Happens about 25% of the time. There's no Democrats in the race or no Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they've closed the primaries is they run phony write-in candidacies in order to reclose the primaries. And the Democrats do this and the Republicans do this, and they've been doing it for 20 years. It is a level of fraud that is an indictment of the two parties. And we're gonna blow it out of the water. So mid-May, go to Florida open primaries. We think this campaign could be a real barn burner, because we're going after the hypocrisy of both political parties, and we're going to put them on trial and see if we can change the law.
I love it. And when I hear you talk, it makes me hope that you will one day run as an independent. Until then, I think we've got to look around the landscape in Florida and see who we can find. In Pennsylvania, we had Rocky Bleier on this show, and we've all seen Rocky Bleier. I think that's the kind of person that could, be merged with a movement and really be competitive, because he's so well known and so well trusted. Anybody who heard him on this show understands what I'm talking about. But your voice is so important, John. You're a great patriot. You've been a great mentor and friend to me, and you're just doing tireless, important, critical work every day. Thank you for all you're doing out there. Big shout out to the whole team and everybody out there in the States who are doing the good work. Everybody go to open primaries and support everything that John Opdycke does. He's on the wall for all of us in the independent movement, and he'll stay there until the job is done. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Paul.
Stay vigilant, my friend.